Let the man go! Robin Hood shouted. He had an arrow trained on a wolf. Hatchet squealed and begged for someone to save him. Can you believe this guy? He built this place to honor his bravery. The wolf said, The brave hero who destroyed me is sobbing like a baby. Wolf, I'm going to give you one last chance to stop this now, Granny said sternly. The wolf raised his eyebrows in surprise. Rhoda, you're threatening me? I'm serious. We should talk about this, the wolf said, looking at Howard Hatchet. Just let me finish my lunch. He opened his jaws wide and bit down hard on Hatchet's arm. The man cried out in agony. Daphne, do it, Granny said as she stepped aside. Daphne placed the kazoo in her mouth and blew a long, fuzzy note. The wind appeared from nowhere, blasting through the surrounding trees and sending leaves and branches flying in all directions. The wolf released Hatchet and glared at the little girl. That belongs to me, he growled and leaped forward. He was nearly on top of Daphne when Robin's arrow sank into the wolf's arm. He howled in pain and pulled it out. He continued toward the little girl, but was knocked to his knees when Little John pounded him on the back with his staff. Puck leaped into the air and landed on the wolf's shoulders, standing. With his sword, he smacked the beast on the top of its head, and then he backflipped out of the way. None of this had much effect on the monster, and the beast lunged forward once again. This time, the wolf pinned Daphne to the ground. The little girl kept blowing into the kazoo, but the desired effect was either not working or taking too long. All Sabrina could think to do was jump on the wolf's back. She punched and kicked, driving her limbs into the monster's tough hide with all she had. She could hear him laughing, maybe at her efforts, but maybe also at the fear in Daphne's face. He opened his mouth and revealed his horrid teeth, and prepared to sink them into Sabrina's sister when the wind wrapped around him. It was almost visible, the snake-like clinging. Once it was tightly around the monster, it began to pull. The wolf snarled and struggled, as if he had gotten caught in a hunter's trap. He cursed Daphne, bellowed threats, swore he'd tear her limb from limb, but the wind prevented him from harming her. Sabrina, too, was helpless in the blustery cage. She did her best to let go of the wolf, but she was firmly locked in the wind's grip. And then the writhing shadow creature was pulled out of Canis. Like Red Riding Hood, it was horrible, but this one was more than the shape of a wolf, snapping and spitting with foam dripping from its jaws. It hovered above them, howling and screaming, helpless in the magic of the wind. Sabrina looked down and realized that she was no longer clinging to the wolf. Lying on the ground beneath her was Mr. Canis. He was unconscious but breathing. Sabrina tried to break free, Granny cried, but nothing Sabrina did seemed to help. All she could do was look into the shadow creature's terrible eyes. It howled in her face, and then she felt an odd sensation, as if the wind had blown through her, like it had seeped into her skin. The wind disappeared and all was calm. She looked around for the monster, hoping someone had captured it. Where did it go? She said, though her voice sounded odd, deep and scratchy. But the rest of her body felt wonderful, strong and fast and unstoppable. In fact, Sabrina had never felt as confident as she did at that moment. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't worried about monsters, villains, or lunatics. She didn't fear surprise attacks or betrayal by people she trusted. In fact, she was eager for a confrontation. She wanted to share the feeling with her sister, but the words were hard to find. Her thoughts were cloudy and complicated. She tried to say something, but it came out sounding like a horrible, hungry laugh. She turned to Daphne. The little girl was undergoing her own transformation. A swirling black fog circled her body, blocking out most of her face. All Sabrina could see were the little girl's eyes, like two brilliant suns. Sabrina, you have to stop this, Granny cried. Sabrina was confused. What did the old woman mean? She wasn't doing anything wrong. Sabrina, please don't make me do this to you, Daphne begged from behind the black fog. What are you talking about? Sabrina said, noticing the shiny toy in her sister's hand. You have to fight this, Daphne said. I know you are still in there. Don't let him control you. Have you lost your mind? Why are you talking to me like this? Sabrina asked. When no one replied, she realized that her words were only in her head. Fight him, child, a voice said from below, and Sabrina glanced down. Mr. Canis lay at her feet, old and withered, his body trapped in the clutches of a huge, fur-covered paw. It was squeezing the life from the old man's chest. She cried out, hoping someone would help her pull her friend from its terrible grip. But her cries ceased when she realized the claws that were killing Mr. Canis were her own. She had become the big bad wolf. She stomped into the house and found a dingy mirror on the wall. One look sent her into shock. Her whole body had been transformed. Her long blonde hair was gone, replaced by thick matted fur that covered her entire body. Her hands were huge and the fingers curled into horrible claws. She spun around and felt a bushy tail behind her. It was insanity. How could this have happened? She roared angrily and then smashed the mirror in front of her. I'll fix this, Daphne said from behind her. Sabrina turned to look at the little girl, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. Seeing her made Sabrina hungry. She imagined grabbing the girl, and no, she knew she had to fight her impulse, but how could she? Her need, her hunger was overwhelming. And then the wind returned and everything went black. When Sabrina awoke, she was back to her normal self. She lay in the bed in the little wooden house that Red Riding Hood's grandmother had slept in hundreds of years before. Standing near her was her family. Daphne was crying and wiping the tears on her sleeve. Mr. Canis was there too. In his hand, he held a glass mason jar. Inside, Sabrina could see a dark, black creature desperate to escape. Briar, Snow, and Charming were there, as well as Robin and Little John and the rest of the merry men. How are you feeling, child? Canis asked. Normal, Sabrina said, examining her arms to make sure they were free of fur. Canis chuckled. It's a wonderful feeling. Is it over? She asked him. He nodded, in a manner of speaking. Granny Rhoda bent down and felt her forehead. You've had quite a day, the old woman said as the air filled with sirens. Here comes Nottingham, Robin said. So, are we decided? Charming and Canis looked one another in the eye and then shook their hands. Yes, they said. What's going on? Sabrina said. Charming and Canis were usually bitter enemies. I'm afraid that after you and your family, we've become Fairyport Landing's most wanted, Charming said. Right where we belong, Little John bellowed. Canis smiled slightly. We're going to have to hide out for a while. There are places in the mountains where no one will find us. You're going too? Sabrina asked the teacher. Snow nodded, then turned to Charming. Someone has to look after this bunch of troublemakers. I won't be far, Canis said to Granny. I know, old friend. One of the merry men raced into the room. They're coming down the path. Canis finally turned to Puck. You're in charge, boy. Haven't I always been? Puck said. Then we're off, Robin said. Don't worry, people, you're going to like the forest. The Merryman, Charming, Snow White, and finally Mr. Canis left the shack. Canis turned back for one moment. You say my name is Tobias Clay? Sabrina nodded. I'm very eager to get to know him, he said. Then he was gone. Nottingham dragged the family in for questioning, but after several hours he released them. Despite his anger, he had no proof that anyone in the Grimm family had been responsible for freeing Canis, killing Bluebeard, or inciting the riot. Still, he made it clear that soon he would have all of them at the ends of nooses. Uncle Jake dropped Briar Rose off at her coffee shop and promised to call later. She smiled and whispered something into his ear. He grinned like a child on Christmas morning and watched her walk away. What did she say? Daphne asked. She said she's in love with me. Boff! Puck cried. When they pulled into the driveway, Sabrina was startled to see Nurse Brett standing on the front porch. Nurse Brett! Granny cried when she got out of the car. We're very sorry we're late. We were detained by the sheriff. Nurse Brett was finishing off a meatball sandwich and seemed quite content. No problem, Mrs. Grimm. I hope you aren't in any trouble. Trouble is practically our middle name, Granny said. I brought the girl. She's around here somewhere. Oh, here she comes, Brett said, gesturing to the side of the house. There Sabrina was shocked to see Red Riding Hood bounding around the corner with Elvis in tow. Is this your doggy? Red asked. He's so much fun. Elvis licked the girl happily. What is she doing here? Sabrina asked. Granny knelt down to eye level with Red. She's coming to stay with us. What? Mr. Canis asked us to look after her while he's away, and I think it's a wonderful idea. Red needs some friends while she works on her memory. Red smiled at the girls. But she tried to kill us, Sabrina said. Sabrina, don't hold a grudge. Granny gave Red Mr. Canis's bedroom and promised that she would take the child shopping the next day for some more modern clothing. Sabrina followed her sister up to their room, tired as a dog, but Daphne did not enter the room. She went into Granny's and closed the door. It broke Sabrina's heart. Winning her sister's respect back was going to take a lot of work. She went to bed, but without Daphne, the room seemed huge and lonely. She tossed and turned, and though she was exhausted, she couldn't sleep. After a while, she decided to visit her parents. She opened the door and found them there, still soundly slumbering on the queen-size bed. She crawled in between them and closed her eyes. She heard Mirror clear his throat and knew his face had appeared in the reflection. Want to see where Goldilocks is? He asked. Sabrina fought back a tear. No, we're done looking. She doesn't want to come back. Not that I can blame her, really. If I could get out of this town, I might never come back. I know exactly how you feel, Starfish, Mirror said. Sabrina watched his face disappear. She reached over and kissed her father on the cheek, then did the same to her mother. Her kisses weren't magical. They wouldn't awake Henry and Veronica, but maybe they made a difference to her parents. They certainly made a difference to her. She closed her eyes and drifted to sleep. That seems to be the end of this video, and probably the last one for tonight as well. Anyways, goodbye.